Elena's name was called out in front of the entire gathering before she even understood what was happening. Garrett stood on the raised platform with his arms crossed, and behind him stood his father, Alpha Cassius, watching with a face carved from stone. The crowd of wolves pressed closer, eyes hungry for a spectacle, and Elena felt her stomach drop as Garrett pointed directly at her. "She belongs to me," Garrett said, loud enough for every ear in the clearing to catch. "I claimed her seasons ago. Nothing has changed." Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. She had spent years avoiding this exact moment, dodging Garrett's attention, hiding in the lowest corners of pack life where omegas like her were rarely noticed. But tonight there was nowhere to hide. The bonfire roared behind him, throwing orange light across hundreds of watching faces, and every single one of them believed Garrett's claim before she had even opened her mouth. "I never agreed to that," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You never asked, you only decided." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Omegas did not speak back to an Alpha's son. It was not done, but Elena had nothing left to lose, not with her mother growing weaker by the day in the small cabin at the edge of the territory, not with the pack already treating her like something to be passed between hands. Garrett stepped down from the platform, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps meant to remind everyone watching exactly who held the power here. "You don't have a mate," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You don't have protection. You don't have anything. By the time the moon rises tomorrow, you'll belong to me whether you like it or not, and the pack will celebrate it as a mating worth honoring." Elena's throat tightened. She looked past him toward the crowd, searching for even one sympathetic face, and found none. Fear pooled cold in her chest, the kind of fear that came from knowing a decision was about to be made for her, one she had no power to stop. That was when a stranger stepped out from the tree line. He moved without hurry, but something about the way the crowd parted for him told Elena immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold far more years than his face suggested. He wore no pack mark, no colors, nothing that announced where he came from. And yet when he walked past the seated elders, several of them instinctively lowered their gaze, as if some old instinct told them to. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," the stranger said, his voice calm but carrying easily across the clearing. "Elena already has a mate." Garrett turned, irritation flashing across his face. "And who exactly are you?" "Damon," the stranger said simply. "Her mate." The crowd erupted into whispers. Elena stood frozen, unsure whether to correct him or stay silent, her mind racing through every possible consequence of either choice. Garrett studied Damon with narrowed eyes, clearly searching for a scent mark, a bond signal, anything that would prove or disprove the claim. "I've never seen you in this territory," Garrett said. "I've been traveling," Damon replied. "Elena and I have been apart while I settled matters elsewhere. I came back the moment I heard she was in danger." It was a bold lie, delivered with such steady confidence that even Elena almost believed it herself. Alpha Cassius rose from his seat, his presence alone enough to silence the crowd's murmuring. "If this is true," Cassius said, his voice a low growl of authority, "then prove it. A true mate bond leaves no room for doubt." Damon walked forward without hesitation and stood beside Elena. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, her pulse hammering so loudly she was certain everyone nearby could hear it. His fingers were warm, steady, nothing like the trembling she felt inside herself. "Elena," he said quietly, "just for her. Trust me for the next few minutes, that's all I'm asking." She had no reason to trust a complete stranger, and yet something about his voice, low and certain, made her nod once, barely visible to anyone else. Cassius studied them both for a long moment. There was no golden shimmer in the air, no visible sign of a true mate bond igniting, but there was also no denying the confidence radiating from the stranger, a confidence that unsettled even the Alpha himself. Garrett, for his part, looked ready to argue further, but his father raised a hand to silence him. "This matter will be settled properly," Cassius said. "Not tonight, in front of a bonfire like common gossip. If this bond is false, it will be discovered soon enough, and the consequences will fall on both of you." The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring and casting glances back at Elena and the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to claim her. Garrett lingered the longest, his jaw tight with anger, before finally turning and disappearing into the group of pack members loyal to him. When the clearing had mostly emptied, Elena pulled her hand free from Damon's grip and stepped back, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Damon said. "I know what it looks like when someone is about to be forced into something they don't want. I've seen it before. I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. That doesn't explain why you'd risk yourself for a stranger. Damon glanced toward the tree line, then back at her, something guarded settling behind his eyes. Let's just say I'm someone who understands what it means to need protection and what it costs when no one offers it. Elena crossed her arms, unconvinced but no longer as guarded as before. You do realize what you just did, don't you? You just told the entire pack we're mates. Garrett isn't going to let this go quietly. Neither is Cassius. I'm aware, Damon said. I'm also aware you didn't correct me in front of them, which tells me you needed the excuse as much as I offered it. She wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. Without his interruption, she would already belong to Garrett by tomorrow's moonrise, bound to a mating she had never chosen, trapped under a claim she could never undo. As much as she hated relying on a stranger, the alternative was worse. My mother is sick, Elena said finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She needs medicine, warmth, food that I can barely provide on an Omega's rations. If I go along with this, if we keep up this act, I need something in return. Protection isn't enough. I need help. Damon considered this for a long moment. I can offer both. Shelter, resources, protection from Garrett, and anyone else who tries to claim what isn't theirs. In exchange, I need somewhere to stay that draws no suspicion, somewhere I can remain quiet for a while without questions being asked. Why do you need to hide? That's a conversation for another day, Damon said, and something in his tone told her not to push further, not yet. Elena studied him carefully, weighing the offer against every warning instinct screaming inside her. Trusting a stranger who had just inserted himself into her life with a bold lie should have terrified her more than it did, but looking at her options, a fake mate who asked for nothing but quiet shelter seemed far safer than a real claim from someone who had already shown exactly what kind of mate he intended to be. Fine, she said. We do this, but you follow my lead when it comes to the pack, and you stay away from anything that could get us both banished, or worse. Agreed, Damon said. They shook on it, an oddly formal gesture between two people who had just built an entire false relationship out of nothing in front of hundreds of witnesses. As they turned to walk back toward the outer edge of the territory where Elena's small cabin stood, she stole a glance at him, trying to read something, anything, in his composed expression. One more thing, she said. The pack is going to expect proof, marks, scent, behavior. If we're going to convince them, we need this to look real. Damon nodded. I'm aware of what a bond requires. I'll follow whatever guidance you give me. Elena exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing only slightly. The night had started with her being publicly claimed by a man she despised, and it was ending with her bound, at least in appearance, to a man she knew nothing about. Neither outcome felt safe. But one of them, at least, gave her a choice. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Elena noticed several pairs of eyes still watching them from the shadows between the trees, pack members who had lingered to see where the mysterious stranger would go. She kept her chin high, forcing herself to walk like someone who belonged beside him, like someone who had chosen this. Behind them, unseen in the darkness, Garrett stood with his arms crossed, watching the pair disappear toward Elena's cabin. His expression had shifted from anger into something colder, more calculating. He did not believe the bond was real, and he intended to prove it, no matter what it took. Elena reached her cabin and pushed open the door, the familiar smell of dried herbs and wood smoke greeting her. Her mother, Miriam, lay resting near the small fire, her breathing shallow but steady. Elena knelt beside her, brushing a strand of gray hair from her mother's forehead, relief washing over her that at least this part of her world remained unchanged. Who is this? Miriam asked weakly, noticing the stranger standing near the doorway. This is Damon, Elena said carefully. He's going to be staying with us for a while. Miriam studied him with tired eyes, then looked back at her daughter, something knowing passing across her weathered face. She did not ask further questions that night, though Elena suspected her mother understood more than she let on. Damon remained near the door, giving them space, his gaze sweeping the small cabin with quiet assessment, noting the thin blankets, the low supply of firewood, the general state of hardship that came with Omega rank. Something tightened in his jaw, though he said nothing. Later, once Miriam had drifted back to sleep, Elena stepped outside where Damon waited near the tree line, his figure barely visible against the darkness. Thank you, she said quietly, the words feeling strange in her mouth after everything that had happened. For tonight. For stepping in when you didn't have to. You looked like someone who needed it, Damon said simply. That still doesn't explain who you really are. Damon's gaze drifted toward the distant mountains, shadows stretching long under the moonlight. In time, he said. For now, let's just get through tomorrow. Something tells me Garrett won't let this rest quietly. Elena nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. Whatever she had agreed to, whatever quiet danger walked beside her now wearing the face of a calm stranger, one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Her life had just changed completely, and there was no undoing what had been set into motion tonight. Somewhere beyond the pack's borders, far from the warmth of Elena's small cabin, 3 figures moved through the darkness with purpose, tracking a scent that had eluded them for months. They paused at the edge of Blackthorn territory, exchanging a silent look before melting back into the shadows, patient enough to wait for their moment. The night grew quiet again, but nothing about Elena's world would ever return to what it had been before. The morning arrived too quickly for Elena's liking, sunlight spilling through the thin curtains of her cabin and pulling her from a restless sleep filled with half-formed worries about what today would bring. She found Damon already awake, sitting near the fire, feeding small logs into the flames with careful, practiced movements that seemed oddly domestic for someone she barely knew. "You didn't sleep," Elena observed, noting the alertness in his eyes despite the early hour. "I don't need much," Damon said. "Old habit." She wanted to ask what kind of life required a person to stay awake through entire nights watching shadows, but she pushed the question aside for now. There were more urgent matters to address, starting with how they were going to convince an entire pack that their bond was real, when neither of them had the faintest idea how to behave like true mates. "The pack will be watching everything we do," Elena said, sitting across from him. "How we speak to each other, how we stand, whether we touch without hesitation. Omegas gossip more than anyone else in this pack, and they'll report every detail back to Garrett and his circle." "Then teach me what to do," Damon said. "I meant what I said last night. I'll follow your lead." Elena studied him for a long moment, trying to determine whether his easy compliance was genuine, or simply another layer of whatever mask he wore. Either way, she had no better option, so she began explaining the small customs that marked a true mate bond within the pack. The way partners stood closer than friends, the habit of casual touches, a hand on the back, fingers brushing during conversation, the quiet way mates checked on each other without needing to ask. Damon listened carefully, absorbing each detail with the focus of someone accustomed to learning quickly under pressure. When she finished, he nodded once. "Understood. Anything else I should know before we face them?" "Don't let Garrett provoke you," Elena said. "He'll try. He's used to getting what he wants, and losing me in front of the entire pack wounded his pride more than anything else. He'll look for any excuse to prove our bond is fake. I can handle Garrett." Something in the flat certainty of his voice made Elena pause. She had seen plenty of confident wolves before, wolves who postured and puffed themselves up to seem more dangerous than they were. Damon's confidence felt different, quieter, the kind that came from someone who had faced far greater threats than an alpha's spoiled son. They left the cabin shortly after, walking together toward the center of the territory where daily pack activities carried on despite the previous night's drama. Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes the moment they stepped into the open, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. She forced herself to walk naturally beside Damon, resisting the urge to put distance between them. Near the training grounds, a cluster of Omegas paused their work to watch the pair pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly hidden envy. One of them, a young woman named Clara, broke away from the group and jogged over, falling into step beside Elena with a grin that seemed both delighted and disbelieving. "You've been holding out on me," Clara said, glancing sideways at Damon with obvious interest. "A mate this whole time, and you never said a word?" "It's complicated," Elena said carefully. "Complicated how?" Clara pressed, though her tone stayed light and teasing rather than suspicious. "Because from where I stood last night, it looked like he showed up out of nowhere just to save you from Garrett's nonsense. Which honestly was the best thing I've seen happen at a gathering in years." Elena managed a small, tight smile, grateful that Clara's curiosity leaned more toward gossip than genuine doubt. "We'll catch up properly soon, I promise." Clara studied Damon a moment longer, then shrugged and returned to her group, already whispering excitedly to the others. Elena exhaled quietly, relieved that at least one interaction had passed without incident. Their next encounter proved far less simple. As they approached the central well where pack members gathered water each morning, Elena spotted Garrett standing with 2 of his closest allies, positioned deliberately in their path. She slowed her steps, bracing herself. "Sleep well?" Garrett asked, his tone dripping with false pleasantness as they drew near. "Better than expected," Elena replied evenly. Garrett's gaze shifted to Damon, sweeping over him with calculated scrutiny. "Funny thing about mate bonds, he said. They usually announce themselves the moment two wolves stand close enough. A pull, a warmth. Something visible to anyone paying attention. Strange that nobody felt anything last night, don't you think? Bonds don't always announce themselves the same way for everyone, Damon said calmly. Some take longer to fully settle. I wouldn't expect someone unfamiliar with real devotion to understand the difference. The insult landed cleanly, and Garrett's jaw tightened, his allies shifting uncomfortably beside him. Elena fought to keep her expression neutral, though inwardly she was both alarmed and strangely impressed by how effortlessly Damon had turned the exchange back on him. You'll want to be careful, Garrett said, lowering his voice into something more threatening. Strangers who wander into pack territory making bold claims tend to draw attention. The kind of attention that asks a lot of uncomfortable questions. I welcome questions, Damon said. I have nothing to hide. It was, Elena realized, another lie, delivered with the same effortless calm as the first. Garrett studied him a moment longer, clearly searching for some crack in the composure, some sign of weakness he could exploit. Finding none, he finally stepped aside, allowing them to pass, though his eyes followed them the entire way. Once they were far enough from the well, Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was too close, she muttered. He's not going to stop. He's going to keep pushing until he finds something. Let him push, Damon said. Some things don't crack no matter how hard they're pressed. Elena glanced at him, curiosity gnawing at her despite every instinct telling her not to ask too many questions too soon. You said last night that you understood what it meant to need protection. What did you mean by that? Damon was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Everyone carries something they'd rather keep buried, he said finally. I'm no different. It wasn't an answer, not really, but Elena decided not to push further, at least not yet. Whatever secrets Damon carried, she suspected they ran far deeper than a simple traveler passing through packlands, and uncovering them too quickly might unravel more than either of them was prepared for. The rest of the day passed in a careful rhythm of small performances, Elena and Damon moving through pack life together, learning the unspoken choreography of appearing as devoted mates while keeping their actual arrangement hidden beneath the surface. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep into Elena's bones, though it wasn't entirely from physical effort. The constant vigilance of maintaining a lie in front of an entire pack proved far more draining than she had anticipated. As night fell and the territory grew quiet, Elena sat near the fire in her cabin, watching Damon methodically check the perimeter of the small home, before finally settling near the door, alert even in stillness. Her mother had fallen asleep hours earlier, her breathing steadier than it had been in days, perhaps aided by the extra firewood and food Damon had quietly provided without being asked. You didn't have to do that, Elena said softly, nodding toward the fire and the small basket of supplies near the hearth. The extra wood, the food. I said I'd help, Damon replied. I meant it. Elena studied him across the firelight, the flickering glow casting shadows across features that seemed both familiar and utterly unknowable. Whatever secrets he carried, whatever danger trailed behind him through the darkness, one thing had become clear over the course of this long, tense day. Damon was not simply hiding from something, he was preparing for it, watching every shadow with the practiced awareness of someone who expected trouble to find him eventually. And somewhere beyond the borders of Blackthorn territory, trouble was already on its way. 2 nights later, Elena woke to the sound of movement outside her cabin, a soft rustle of footsteps that didn't belong to the usual patrol patterns she had grown used to hearing. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, and found Damon already standing near the window, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as he listened. Stay inside, he said quietly, without turning around. What is it? Rogue scent, Damon said. Faint, but recent. Someone crossed the border tonight who shouldn't have. Elena's stomach twisted with alarm. Rogue wolves rarely ventured this deep into pack territory without purpose, and purpose usually meant trouble. She moved to wake her mother, but Damon raised a hand slightly, signaling her to wait. They're moving away from the cabin, he said after a moment. Toward the eastern ridge. I need to see what they're after. You can't go out there alone, Elena said, fear sharpening her voice. I'll be fine, Damon said, already moving toward the door with quiet purpose. Lock this behind me. I'll return before sunrise. Before she could argue further, he slipped out into the darkness, disappearing between the trees with a speed and silence that unsettled her deeply. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the closed door, torn between fear for his safety and a growing certainty that whatever Damon truly was, he was far more capable of handling danger than any ordinary traveler had a right to be. She did not sleep again that night, sitting instead near the fire with her mother's blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, listening to every distant sound, and praying it wasn't trouble finally catching up to the fragile life they had built together. When Damon returned just before dawn, his expression unreadable but his composure fully intact, Elena felt relief flood through her so strongly it nearly buckled her knees. "What did you find?" she asked. "Scouts," Damon said simply. "Nothing more than that, for now. But they were looking for something specific. I intend to find out exactly what before they return." Elena studied him carefully, aware that whatever quiet arrangement they had built together was about to be tested by forces far larger than a jealous Alpha's son or a suspicious pack council. The bargain she had made in a moment of desperation was proving to be far more complicated and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. But as she watched Damon settle back near the fire, weary but unshaken, she realized something else entirely. Despite every warning instinct telling her to be afraid, she felt undeniably safer with him beside her than she ever had standing alone. Whatever storm was gathering beyond the borders of Blackthorn territory, Elena suspected they were only beginning to feel its first distant tremors. Word of the strange scent along the eastern ridge spread through the pack within a day, carried by nervous patrol wolves who reported unfamiliar tracks crossing into territory that should have been secure. Alpha Cassius called for increased watches along the border, and for a few days, the tension surrounding Elena and Damon's questionable bond took a back seat to the more immediate concern of possible rogue activity. Elena used the temporary distraction to her advantage, spending quiet hours teaching Damon more about pack customs, the subtle hierarchy that governed every interaction, the unspoken rules that determined who spoke first in a gathering and who deferred to whom. He absorbed each lesson with unsettling ease, as though he had learned similar systems before in some other life he refused to discuss. "You're a fast learner," Elena remarked one afternoon as they walked together toward the training grounds, watching a group of young wolves practice basic combat drills under the supervision of a senior warrior. "I've had practice adapting to new environments," Damon said. "Is that something you do often? Adapt to new environments?" He glanced at her, something almost amused flickering behind his guarded expression. "More than I'd like." Before Elena could press further, a commotion near the training grounds drew their attention. Garrett stood at the center of a small crowd, sparring against one of the pack's stronger warriors in what had clearly begun as a friendly demonstration but had shifted into something more aggressive. Onlookers murmured nervously as Garrett pressed his advantage, his movements sharp and controlled, clearly showing off for the gathering crowd. When the match ended with Garrett standing triumphant, he turned, his gaze immediately locking onto Elena and Damon standing at the edge of the grounds. A slow, challenging smile spread across his face. "Since you're here," Garrett called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "perhaps your mate would like to demonstrate his own skills. I'd be curious to see what kind of training produces someone confident enough to challenge an alpha's claim." The crowd's attention shifted instantly toward Damon, curiosity and anticipation rippling through the gathered wolves. Elena's stomach dropped, recognizing the trap immediately. If Damon refused, it would look like weakness, further fueling suspicion about the authenticity of their bond. If he accepted and performed poorly, the same suspicion would only deepen. And if he performed too well, it would raise entirely different questions about who exactly he was and where such skill had come from. "I don't make a habit of proving myself for entertainment," Damon said calmly. "Afraid?" Garrett taunted, clearly enjoying the moment. "Careful," Elena murmured, low enough for only Damon to hear. "This is exactly what he wants." Damon glanced at her briefly, something calculating passing behind his eyes before he stepped forward anyway. "One match," he said to Garrett, "nothing more." Elena's heart clenched with worry as the crowd parted to let Damon into the training circle. Garrett rolled his shoulders, clearly relishing the opportunity to embarrass the mysterious stranger who had humiliated him days earlier. The senior warrior who had been sparring with Garrett stepped back, gesturing for the two men to begin. What followed unfolded so quickly that many in the crowd would later argue over exactly what they had witnessed. Garrett lunged first, confident and aggressive, expecting an easy victory against an unranked stranger. But Damon moved with a fluid precision that seemed almost lazy in its efficiency, sidestepping the attack with minimal effort and redirecting Garrett's own momentum against him. Garrett stumbled, catching himself before falling completely, fury flashing across his face as he turned for a second attempt. This time Damon met him directly, blocking the strike with an ease that silenced the murmuring crowd almost instantly. Within moments, Garrett found himself pinned, not through brute strength alone but through a controlled, almost effortless display of skill that left no room for argument. The crowd fell utterly silent. Damon released him immediately, stepping back with the same calm composure he had carried throughout the entire exchange. Garrett rose slowly, humiliation burning hot across his face, glancing around at the stunned onlookers who had just witnessed their alpha's son defeated without a single serious blow being thrown. "That's enough for today," Damon said quietly, before turning and walking back toward Elena, leaving Garrett standing alone in the center of the training circle. Elena stared at him as they walked away from the grounds, disbelief and a growing sense of unease settling over her. "What was that?" she whispered. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody unranked, nobody Omega, nobody I've ever seen in this pack." "I told you," Damon said. "I've had practice." "That wasn't practice. That was something else entirely." Damon remained silent, his expression carefully neutral, and Elena realized with growing certainty that whatever secret he carried was far larger than she had initially assumed. A stranger who could dismantle an alpha's son without breaking composure was not simply hiding from ordinary trouble. He was hiding from something that had trained him to be exactly this dangerous, exactly this controlled, and exactly this careful about revealing it. Behind them, Garrett stood watching their retreating figures, humiliation curdling into something colder and more determined. He turned to one of his allies standing nearby, his voice low and sharp. "Find out everything you can about him," Garrett said. "Where he came from, who he answers to, what he's running from. I want answers before the week is out." His ally nodded and slipped away into the crowd, already planning where to begin digging. That evening, as Elena prepared a simple meal for her mother and Damon settled near the fire, cleaning a small blade with methodical focus, she finally allowed herself to voice the question that had been building inside her all afternoon. "Whatever you're hiding," she said quietly, "it's not going to stay hidden much longer. Garrett is going to dig, and eventually he's going to find something. If we're going to keep surviving this, I need to know what we're actually protecting." Damon set the blade aside, meeting her gaze directly for the first time in days. "You're right," he said. "It won't stay buried forever. But there are things I can't say yet. Not until I'm certain it's safe to say them." "Safe for who? You or me?" "Both," Damon said. "Especially you." Elena studied him a long moment, frustration and curiosity warring inside her chest. Whatever answers he carried, whatever truth waited beneath the calm surface he presented to the pack, she suspected it would eventually reshape everything she thought she understood about the bargain they had made. Outside, the night settled over Blackthorn territory, quiet and still, though far beyond its borders. The ally Garrett had sent slipped through neighboring territories, asking careful questions, searching for any trace of a stranger who moved like a warrior, but claimed to be nothing more than an Omega passing through. He would not find easy answers, but he would find enough to make the pack's suspicion grow into something far more dangerous than idle gossip. Nearly a week passed before Garrett's search finally produced something useful. His ally returned from a neighboring territory late one evening, breathless and clearly eager to share what he had uncovered. Garrett met him privately, away from prying ears, his patience thin after days of humiliation following the training grounds incident. "Well?" Garrett demanded. "Nobody in the neighboring packs recognizes him by the name Damon," the ally reported. "But a trader mentioned hearing rumors, weeks ago, about unrest in the northern territories. Something about a bloodline dispute, a king driven from his throne under mysterious circumstances. The details were vague, but the timing lines up with when this stranger first appeared in our lands." Garrett's eyes narrowed with interest. "A king? That's the rumor. Nothing confirmed. But if it's true, it would explain a great deal. The skill he showed against you. And the way even the elders seem uneasy around him without knowing why." Garrett considered this new information carefully, calculating how best to use it. A hidden king, if the rumor proved true, was far more valuable as leverage than a simple rogue or wandering warrior. Exposing him could either earn tremendous favor from whatever faction had driven him out, or it could bring dangerous attention down upon Blackthorn territory itself, if the wrong people came looking. "Keep this quiet for now," Garrett instructed. "I want more information before we act. If he truly is hiding something this significant, I intend to be the one who benefits from exposing it." His ally nodded and slipped away, leaving Garrett alone with his thoughts, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face as new possibilities unfolded before him. Meanwhile, unaware of how close Garrett had come to uncovering the truth, Elena continued navigating the delicate balance of pack life alongside Damon, each day bringing new small tests of their fabricated bond. The pack's suspicion had not fully faded, but But the training grounds incident had, at the very least, silenced most open mockery, replaced instead by wary curiosity and quiet whispers that followed them wherever they went. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the edge of the territory for her mother's remedies, Elena found herself unexpectedly alone with Agnes, one of the pack's oldest and most respected elders. Agnes had always been kind toward the lower-ranked members of the pack, offering quiet wisdom where others offered only judgment, and Elena had long considered her one of the few trustworthy voices within Blackthorn's leadership. "You've had quite the eventful few weeks," Agnes remarked, settling onto a fallen log with the careful movements of someone whose joints had grown weary with age. "That's one way to describe it," Elena said, continuing her work gathering herbs nearby. Agnes watched her for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "That stranger of yours," she said finally, "there's something about him that unsettles even the oldest instincts in this pack. I've lived a long life, child, and I've encountered many wolves claiming hidden strength. Few have ever carried themselves quite the way he does." Elena's hands stilled over the herbs. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Agnes said carefully, "that whatever he is not simply a wandering Omega, whatever story you've both agreed to tell the pack. I don't say this to expose you, child. I say this because I worry about what danger might follow someone carrying secrets that large." Elena swallowed hard, unsure how much Agnes truly suspected, unsure whether honesty or continued deflection would serve her better in this moment. She chose a careful middle ground. "He's protecting me," Elena said. "Whatever else is true about him, that much I know for certain." Agnes studied her a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then I hope, for both your sakes, that whatever follows him here arrives with enough warning for you to prepare." The elder's words lingered in Elena's mind long after their conversation ended, a quiet warning that settled uneasily, alongside everything else she had begun to suspect about the man sharing her cabin. That evening, as she relayed the exchange to Damon, his expression grew more serious than she had seen it in days. "Agnes is perceptive," he said, "more perceptive than most in this pack realize. She's not wrong, is she, about there being real danger following you here?" Damon was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as though searching for the right words among the flames. "No," he said finally, "she's not wrong." "Then it's time you told me the truth," Elena said. "All of it. I can't keep protecting something I don't understand, Damon. If danger is coming, I deserve to know exactly what we're facing." Damon met her gaze, something heavy and resolved settling behind his eyes, as though he had finally reached the limit of how long a secret this large could remain buried. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's time." But before he could speak further, a sharp knock echoed against the cabin door, urgent and unexpected, cutting through the tension of the moment. Elena rose quickly, exchanging a wary glance with Damon before crossing to answer it. Standing outside, breathless and pale with alarm, was Clara. "You need to come quickly," Clara said. "Both of you. There's been an attack along the northern border. Rogues, more than the scouts expected. Cassius has called every able wolf to the gathering grounds immediately." Elena's heart dropped. The truth she had been about to hear suddenly pushed aside by an urgency that could no longer wait. She glanced back at Damon, who was already moving toward the door, his expression shifting instantly into something sharper, more alert, more prepared than she had ever seen him. Whatever secret he had been about to share would have to wait a little longer. Trouble had finally arrived at Blackthorn's doorstep, and neither of them could have predicted just how much this single night was about to change everything. The gathering grounds were already in chaos by the time Elena and Damon arrived, warriors rushing in every direction, gathering weapons and forming defensive lines under the barked commands of senior wolves. Alpha Cassius stood at the center of the commotion, directing patrols toward the northern border, where scouts had reported an unusually organized rogue incursion, far larger and more coordinated than the isolated scent they had detected days earlier. "This isn't ordinary rogue activity," Cassius announced grimly to the assembled warriors. "They're moving with purpose, avoiding detection until now. Whatever they're after, they came prepared." Elena felt a cold knot of dread settle in her stomach as she glanced toward Damon, whose expression had grown increasingly tense the closer they came to the gathering point. He said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw and the alertness in his posture told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was happening tonight, he suspected it was connected to him. "Elena," Cassius said, spotting her among the crowd. "Omegas and non-combat pack members are to remain here, protected by the inner guard. This is not the time for anyone untrained to be near the border." "I understand," Elena said, though her eyes darted toward Damon, uncertain whether he intended to join the warriors heading toward danger or remain behind with her. I need to go, Damon said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. If this is what I think it is, I need to see for myself. Damon. I'll return, he said, his gaze steady and certain despite the chaos surrounding them. I promise. Before she could argue further, he moved swiftly toward the group of warriors preparing to head north, falling into step among them with an ease that suggested he had done this many times before in some other life. Elena watched him disappear into the darkness alongside dozens of Blackthorn's strongest fighters, her heart pounding with a fear she hadn't expected to feel so intensely for a man she had known for such a short time. The following hours passed in agonizing uncertainty. Elena remained near the gathering grounds alongside the other Omegas and non-combat members, listening to distant sounds carried on the night wind, unable to determine whether the muffled noises signaled victory or disaster. Clara stayed close beside her, offering quiet companionship through the tense waiting. He'll be fine, Clara said, though her own voice carried more hope than certainty. Did you see him against Garrett? Whatever he's hiding, he's clearly not someone who loses easily. Elena managed a small nod, though worry gnawed steadily at her composure. She had spent weeks building a fragile trust with Damon, uncovering small pieces of a much larger mystery, and now, just as he had finally been ready to share the truth, he had disappeared into danger before she could hear it. Word finally arrived just before dawn, carried by an exhausted runner who confirmed that the border skirmish had been successfully repelled, though not without cost. Several warriors had sustained injuries, and the rogue force, larger and better organized than anticipated, had retreated only after suffering significant losses of their own. Elena rushed toward the returning group the moment they came into view, scanning frantically for Damon among the tired, battle-worn warriors making their way back into the territory. She spotted him near the rear of the group, moving with a slight limp but otherwise intact, and relief flooded through her so powerfully that she nearly forgot herself entirely, closing the distance between them without hesitation. You're hurt, she said, noting the way he favored his left side. It's nothing serious, Damon said, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. As she reached him, her hand instinctively went to his arm to steady him, a simple, natural gesture born purely from concern. The moment her fingers made contact with his skin, something unexpected happened. A warm pulse rippling outward from the point of contact, visible as a faint golden shimmer that several nearby warriors immediately noticed with startled gasps. Elena froze, staring down at her hand still resting against his arm, the shimmer fading as quickly as it had appeared but leaving behind an unmistakable impression on everyone who had witnessed it. That was, Clara began, her voice hushed with disbelief. A true bond pulse, one of the nearby warriors finished, staring at Elena and Damon with wide, astonished eyes. I've never seen one ignite like that, not from casual contact. Whispers spread rapidly through the returning group, confusion and fascination mixing together as word of what had just occurred began traveling toward the rest of the pack. Elena pulled her hand back slowly, her heart pounding, exchanging a stunned glance with Damon whose expression had shifted into something she hadn't seen from him before, genuine surprise breaking through his usual composed mask. Damon, she said quietly, urgency creeping into her voice. What was that? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze distant, as though grappling with something he hadn't fully allowed himself to consider until this exact moment. When he finally met her eyes again, something had shifted behind them, a vulnerability she hadn't witnessed from him before. I think, he said slowly, our arrangement may not have been entirely false after all. Elena's breath caught, understanding beginning to dawn even as disbelief fought against it. Around them, the pack's whispers grew louder, spreading the news of what they had witnessed, with a speed that would reach every corner of Blackthorn territory before the sun had fully risen. Whatever careful lie they had constructed together was unraveling in front of an entire pack, replaced by a truth neither of them had been prepared to face. And somewhere within that truth, Elena suspected, lay the answer to every question she had been asking since the night Damon first stepped out of the shadows to save her. They walked back toward Elena's cabin in tense silence, the pack's stunned reaction still echoing behind them, whispers following their every step like a current they could not outrun. Once inside, with the door finally closed against prying eyes, Elena turned to face him, her earlier fear for his safety now replaced entirely by an urgent need for answers. No more waiting, she said firmly. Tell me everything, right now. Damon lowered himself onto the bench near the fire, wincing slightly from his earlier injury, and for a long moment simply stared into the flames as though gathering the courage to finally release a truth he had carried alone for far too long. My name isn't just Damon, he said finally. It's Damien Ashgrave, Elena waited, sensing there was far more coming, though the weight already carried by the name itself settled heavily in the air between them. I was born into a bloodline that has ruled over the northern territories for generations, Damien continued. A bloodline tied not just to leadership, but to something older, something the northern packs call the Lycan crown. My family has held that crown for longer than most packs can trace their own histories. You're saying you're royalty, Elena said slowly, piecing together the rumor Garrett's ally had uncovered without yet knowing it herself. I'm saying I was king, Damien said, until a council within my own court decided my rule threatened their ambitions. They moved against me quietly, poisoning loyalty before I even understood the danger, until the night they finally struck openly, forcing me to flee with nothing but my life. Elena sank slowly onto the bench across from him, the pieces of the past weeks rearranging themselves rapidly in her mind. The uncanny skill against Garrett, the way elders instinctively lowered their gaze around him, the rogues along the border who had moved with far more purpose than ordinary scavengers. None of it had been random. All of it had been the shadow of a king's hidden presence finally beginning to surface. The rogues tonight, Elena said. They weren't ordinary rogues, were they? No, Damien confirmed. They were scouts, sent by the council that overthrew me, searching for confirmation of rumors that I had survived and might be hiding somewhere in these southern territories. Tonight's skirmish wasn't a coincidence, it was them closing in. Elena's mind raced through the implications. Fear and disbelief tangled together with a strange, undeniable clarity that had been building for weeks. And the bond, she said quietly. The pulse tonight, what does that mean? Damien met her gaze directly, something raw and unguarded finally breaking through his careful composure. It means what I originally claimed as a lie has somehow become true, he said. You are my mate, Elena. Not through choice or coincidence, but through whatever force decides these things beyond our control. I didn't know it when I first offered to protect you. I suspect, somewhere deep down, I did. Elena sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words settling over her slowly. Weeks of careful pretending, of building an elaborate performance meant to protect her from Garrett's cruelty, had somehow uncovered a truth neither of them had dared to consider. She was mated, not to a wandering stranger hiding minor troubles, but to an exiled king carrying dangers far beyond anything Blackthorn territory had ever faced. This changes everything, she said finally. I know, Damien said, and I understand if this is more than you agreed to. You came into this arrangement seeking safety, not a war that isn't yours to fight. Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing fear against something else entirely, something that had been growing steadily beneath the surface of every quiet moment they had shared over the past weeks. You saved me, she said slowly, without knowing whether I could ever repay that kindness. You protected my mother without being asked. You faced humiliation and suspicion from an entire pack rather than abandon a bargain you didn't have to honor. That doesn't erase the danger I've brought to your doorstep. No, Elena agreed, but it tells me exactly who you are, regardless of any crown or bloodline. And that matters more to me than the danger following you. Damien looked at her, something profound and grateful passing behind his eyes, the careful mask he had worn since the night they met finally falling away entirely. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, I won't face it by pretending anymore. Not with you. Outside, the pack's whispers continued to spread through the night, carrying news of the strange golden pulse toward every corner of Blackthorn territory, reaching ears that would soon connect the rumor to something far larger than a simple mate bond. And far beyond the pack's borders, the scouts who had retreated earlier that night were already regrouping, preparing to send word back to the council that had driven their true king into hiding. The truth was finally out between Elena and Damien. But the wider world was only beginning to learn it too, and not everyone who discovered it would wish them well. News of the Golden Pulse spread through Blackthorn territory faster than any rumor Elena had witnessed before, reaching every household and gathering point within a single day. By the following evening, Alpha Cassius summoned both Elena and Damien to a formal council meeting, the kind reserved only for matters the pack considered too significant to handle through ordinary channels. The council chamber was tense when they arrived, elders seated in a careful semicircle, Agnes among them with an expression that mixed curiosity with quiet concern. Garrett stood near his father's seat, arms crossed, clearly having spent the previous day gathering every scrap of information his allies could uncover. A true bond pulse, Cassius began, his voice carrying the weight of formal authority, is not something this council takes lightly. Nor is the timing of its appearance, following weeks of suspicion surrounding a stranger who arrived in our territory with no pack mark, no known lineage, and considerable combat skill unusual for someone claiming Omega status. Elena felt Damien tense slightly beside her, though his expression remained carefully composed. "I believe," Cassius continued, "it is time this council learned exactly who you are." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the assembled elders before finally settling on Cassius directly. "You already suspect the answer," he said. "I can see it in the way your warriors have watched me since the night I arrived." "Suspicion is not confirmation," Cassius said. "Then I'll offer confirmation," Damien said, rising to his full height, something shifting in his bearing that seemed to fill the chamber with an authority far beyond what his simple traveling clothes suggested. "My name is Damien Ashgrave. I am the rightful king of the northern Lycan territories, driven from my throne by a council of traitors who sought power they had no right to claim." A stunned silence fell over the chamber, elders exchanging startled glances, several rising instinctively from their seats as old instincts recognized something their minds had only just caught up to understanding. Garrett's face drained of color, the calculating triumph he had clearly expected to feel upon exposing this secret, replaced instead by genuine shock at the scale of what had just been revealed. Agnes was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I suspected something of this magnitude," she said quietly, "though I confess, I did not expect the truth to be quite this significant." "The rogues along our northern border," Cassius said slowly, understanding dawning across his weathered features. "They weren't ordinary scavengers." "No," Damien confirmed. "They were scouts sent by the same council that overthrew me, searching for confirmation that I survived and remain hidden somewhere in these southern territories. Their presence near your border was not coincidence. It was the beginning of them closing in." The chamber erupted into hushed, urgent conversation, elders debating in low voices the implications of harboring an exiled king within their territory, the danger it might invite, and the potential consequences of choosing sides in a conflict that had nothing to do with Blackthorn originally. Cassius raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "If what you say is true," Cassius said carefully, "then Blackthorn territory has already become entangled in a conflict far beyond our usual concerns. The question this council must answer is whether we stand beside the true bond formed within our lands, or whether we distance ourselves from a danger that threatens to bring war to our doorstep." "I would never ask this pact to fight a war that isn't theirs," Damien said. "All I ask is time, and if possible, discretion, while I determine my next steps. I have no wish to bring harm to Elena, her mother, or anyone within these borders who has shown her kindness." Garrett, recovering slightly from his shock, stepped forward with renewed determination, clearly seeing opportunity within the chaos. "And what of the mate bond?" he demanded. "If he truly is a king, then Elena is bound to royalty whether she intended it or not. That bond makes her a target as much as him." Elena felt every eye in the chamber shift toward her, the weight of the moment pressing down heavily. She rose slowly, meeting Garrett's gaze directly for the first time without fear coloring her voice. "I chose this bond the moment I refused to accept the kind of ownership you once tried to claim over me," she said. "Whatever danger follows from it, I would rather face it standing beside someone who has shown genuine care for my well-being, than live safely beneath someone who saw me as nothing more than property." A murmur of approval rippled through several elders at her words, and even Cassius's stern expression softened slightly with something like respect. Garrett's jaw tightened, humiliation flashing across his face once again, as the council's sympathy clearly shifted away from him. "This council will need time to deliberate," Cassius announced finally. "Until a decision is reached, both of you will remain under Blackthorn's protection. However, given the seriousness of what has been revealed, additional patrols will be assigned along our borders, and discretion regarding this matter will be expected from everyone present in this chamber." The elders nodded their agreement, and slowly the gathering began to disperse, though the weight of what had just been revealed lingered heavily in the air. As Elena and Damien made their way out of the chamber, Agnes caught up to them briefly, placing a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "You've chosen a difficult path, child," Agnes said quietly. "But I suspect it is also the right one. Whatever comes next, know that not everyone within these walls wishes you harm." Elena offered a grateful smile, though worry still churned beneath the surface of her composure. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Damien remained quiet beside her, his expression thoughtful and distant. "That went better than I expected," Elena said finally, attempting to find some measure of reassurance in the outcome. "For now," Damien said, "but Cassius is right to be cautious. The council that overthrew me will not simply give up searching once their scouts fail to report success. If they suspect I've been discovered, They'll send more than scouts next time. Elena's stomach tightened at the implication. How much time do you think we have? Not enough, Damien said grimly, his gaze sweeping toward the distant tree line as though already anticipating the next threat emerging from the shadows. Somewhere far beyond Blackthorn's borders, within a fortified stronghold Elena had never seen and could scarcely imagine, a man named Edmund Thorne received troubling news from a scout who had barely escaped the skirmish along the southern border with his life. Edmund listened with growing displeasure, his fingers drumming impatiently against the armrest of his seat. He's alive, Edmund said finally, more to himself than to the trembling scout before him. And worse, he's found his true mate. The scout said nothing, sensing the danger and offering any opinion on matters far above his position. Edmund rose slowly, moving toward the window of his stronghold, staring out over territories he had ruled through fear and manipulation since the night he had driven the rightful king into exile. Send Silas, Edmund said finally, his voice cold and decisive. Tell him it's time to finish what should have ended months ago. The scout bowed quickly and hurried from the room, leaving Edmund alone with his thoughts, calculating how much time remained before the threat to his stolen power grew too large to contain. Back in Blackthorn territory, unaware of exactly how quickly the danger was mobilizing against them, Elena and Damien returned to the quiet of her cabin, the weight of the day's revelations settling heavily over both of them. Whatever peace they had found in the truth finally being spoken aloud was fragile, and neither of them needed to voice the shared understanding that their time to prepare was rapidly running out. The days following the council's decision to grant Blackthorn's protection passed in an uneasy calm, the kind that settled over a territory bracing for something it could sense approaching but couldn't yet see clearly. Increased patrols moved along the borders day and night, and whispers of the exiled king living among them continued circulating quietly, no longer scandalous gossip but genuine concern shared across every rank within the pack. Elena spent her mornings caring for her mother, whose health had improved steadily thanks to the resources Damien had quietly provided, and her afternoons learning more about the world Damien had once ruled, absorbing details about northern territories, ancient bloodlines, and the political maneuvering that had ultimately led to his overthrow. Tell me about Edmund Thorne, she said one afternoon, as they walked together along the edge of the training grounds, watching young wolves practice under the watchful eyes of senior warriors. Damien's expression darkened slightly at the name. Edmund served on my council for years before his betrayal, he said. I trusted him more than most, which made his betrayal all the more devastating when it finally came. He convinced enough of the other council members that my rule threatened their interests, painted me as weak or reckless depending on who he spoke to, until enough support gathered behind him to move against me directly. How did you survive? Barely, Damien admitted. A handful of loyal guards helped me escape before Edmund's forces could complete what they intended. I've spent months moving quietly through southern territories since then, staying ahead of scouts sent to confirm whether I survived. Until you found Blackthorn, Elena said. Until I found you, Damien corrected gently. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the heaviness of their conversation, a warmth that had been growing steadily over the past weeks, as the careful distance between them continued to dissolve. Whatever fear she still carried about the danger surrounding them, she could no longer deny the genuine connection that had formed between herself and the man originally meant to be nothing more than a convenient lie. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of urgent footsteps approaching, and Elena turned to find Clara hurrying toward them, her expression tight with worry. Patrol just returned, Clara said breathlessly. They spotted riders approaching from the north, moving fast, clearly not ordinary travelers. Cassius has called for immediate defensive preparation. Damien's expression shifted instantly, alertness replacing the earlier warmth entirely. How many riders? At least a dozen, Clara said. Maybe more. That's not a scouting party, Damien said grimly. That's a strike force. Elena's heart pounded as the reality of their situation crashed over her fully. Whatever fragile peace they had built over the past weeks was about to be tested in the most immediate way possible. She turned to Damien, searching his expression for guidance, for reassurance, for anything that might steady the fear rapidly rising within her. What do we do? She asked. We prepare, Damien said, his voice hardening with the kind of resolve that had clearly seen conflict before. And we make certain Blackthorn knows exactly what it's facing before Edmund's forces arrive. Together, they turned and hurried toward the gathering grounds, where Cassius was already organizing defensive lines, warriors moving with practiced urgency, as word of the approaching riders spread through the territory like wildfire. Whatever calm had settled over Blackthorn in recent days was shattering rapidly, replaced by the tense energy of a pack bracing for conflict it hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. As they reached the gathering point, Cassius spotted them immediately, his expression grim. "Your enemies have found you," he said simply. "The question now is whether Blackthorn stands with you, or steps aside." Damien met his gaze steadily. "That decision belongs to you and your council," he said. "But know this, whatever Edmund's forces intend, they will not stop with me. If they discover this pack sheltered their true king, even unknowingly at first, they will consider Blackthorn complicit regardless of your final decision." Cassius's jaw tightened at the implication, understanding settling heavily over his features. Around them, warriors continued gathering, weapons in hand, expressions ranging from fear to fierce determination as the reality of the approaching threat sank in fully. Elena stood beside Damien, her own resolve hardening despite the fear still coursing through her. Whatever came next, whatever battle was about to unfold along Blackthorn's borders, she understood with sudden clarity that there was no retreating from this moment. The bargain she had made weeks earlier to protect herself from Garrett's cruelty had led her here, to a threshold where an entire pack now stood on the edge of a war neither of them had chosen, but both of them would have to face together. In the distance, beyond the tree line, the sound of approaching riders grew steadily louder, carrying with it the first true tremors of the storm that had been building since the night Damien first stepped out of the shadows to save a stranger from a fate she never wanted. The riders emerged from the tree line just as the sun began sinking below the horizon, casting long shadows across the gathering grounds where Blackthorn's warriors stood in tense formation. At their head rode a broad-shouldered man with cold, calculating eyes, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from years of commanding fear rather than earning respect. Elena recognized instinctively that this was Silas, the enforcer Edmund Thorne had sent to finish what his failed scouts could not. Silas reined in his horse a careful distance from Blackthorn's assembled line, his gaze sweeping across the warriors before settling directly on Damien, standing near the front alongside Cassius and Elena. "Well," Silas said, his voice carrying easily across the tense silence. "It seems the rumors were true after all. The exiled king, hiding among southern Omegas like a coward, too afraid to reclaim what was taken from him." "I'm not hiding anymore," Damien said evenly. "You've made certain of that." Silas's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Edmund only wants what's owed to him. Your continued survival threatens the stability he's worked hard to build. Surrender quietly, and perhaps he'll show mercy to the pack that sheltered you. And if I refuse, then Blackthorn burns alongside you," Silas said simply, "and Edmund's mercy dies with the idea of it." A ripple of anger moved through the assembled warriors at the open threat, several stepping forward instinctively before Cassius raised a hand, holding the line steady despite the provocation. "This territory does not respond well to threats," Cassius said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as alpha. "Whatever quarrel exists between you and this man, Blackthorn will not simply hand over someone under our protection without a fight." Silas's gaze shifted toward Cassius, something almost amused flickering across his expression. Brave words from an alpha whose pack has no idea what they're truly facing. "Edmund's forces number far beyond what you see before you tonight. This is merely a courtesy, offering you the chance to step aside before the true conflict arrives." "Then let it arrive," Damien said, stepping forward with quiet, unshakable resolve. "I've spent months running from this fight. I don't intend to run any longer, not while Edmund continues to poison a throne that was never his to claim." Silas studied him for a long moment, clearly recalculating whatever strategy he had arrived with, before finally offering a slow, mocking bow. "As you wish," he said. "Edmund will be pleased to hear you've chosen this path. It makes what comes next considerably simpler to justify." With that, he turned his horse and rode back toward the tree line, his small group of riders following closely behind, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they had emerged. The gathering grounds remained tense long after their departure, warriors exchanging uneasy glances, understanding that whatever had just occurred was merely a preview of something far larger approaching. "That wasn't the full force," Damien said quietly, once the riders had fully disappeared. "That was a message. Edmund wanted us to know he's found me, and that he's prepared to bring war to whoever stands in his way." "How much time do we have before the true attack comes?" Cassius asked. "Days, perhaps," Damien said. "Edmund won't wait long once he confirms I'm truly here. He'll want to end this before word spreads further, before any of my remaining loyalists have time to rally support." Cassius turned to address his warriors, his voice carrying clearly across the tense gathering. "Blackthorn will prepare for what's coming. Every able wolf will train, Every border will be reinforced, and every contingency will be considered. Whatever this pact decides about the politics of a northern throne, we do not abandon those who stand within our protection." A murmur of determined agreement moved through the warriors, and Elena felt a swell of gratitude toward the pack that had once mocked her lowly status, now rallying to protect her and the mate fate had chosen for her, regardless of the danger it invited. As the gathering slowly dispersed, warriors returning to their posts and preparations beginning in earnest, Elena found herself standing quietly beside Damien, watching the last remnants of daylight fade into the deepening night. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Every day," Damien admitted. "But fear has never stopped me from doing what needs to be done. I only regret dragging an entire pack into a conflict that began long before I ever met any of you." "You didn't drag us into anything," Elena said. "Edmund did that, the moment he decided a stolen throne was worth chasing across every territory in search of the king he couldn't fully destroy." Damien looked at her, something soft and grateful passing behind his tired eyes. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "know that meeting you was the one truly good thing to come from all of this." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his without hesitation, no longer performing a bond for the benefit of onlookers, but embracing one that had become entirely, undeniably real. Around them, Blackthorn territory continued preparing through the night, warriors sharpening blades and reinforcing defenses, an entire pack bracing itself for a war that had found them not through choice, but through the courage of standing beside those who deserved protection. Somewhere beyond the borders, Edmund Thorne's forces continued gathering, preparing to march south with the full weight of stolen power behind them. But within Blackthorn's borders, something equally powerful was gathering as well, a resolve born from loyalty, from love, and from a refusal to let fear dictate the outcome of what was about to unfold. The following days passed in a blur of urgent preparation, Blackthorn territory transforming rapidly from a peaceful pack settlement into something resembling a fortress bracing for siege. Warriors trained from dawn until dusk, elders coordinated supply stores in anticipation of prolonged conflict, and scouts patrolled the borders in overlapping shifts to ensure no surprise attack could catch them unprepared. Damien proved instrumental in this preparation, drawing on knowledge and strategy clearly honed through years of leadership that extended far beyond simple combat skill. He worked alongside Cassius and the senior warriors, mapping defensive positions, identifying the territory's natural advantages, and training smaller groups of fighters and techniques designed specifically to counter the kind of organized force Edmund's council commanded. "You've done this before," Cassius observed one evening, watching as Damien corrected the positioning of a defensive formation with practiced precision. "More times than I'd like to remember," Damien replied, "though I never expected to be fighting for someone else's territory rather than my own throne." "Perhaps that's exactly why this fight matters so much," Cassius said thoughtfully. "A king who fights only for his own power learns very different lessons than one who learns to fight for people who have no obligation to stand beside him, yet choose to anyway." Damien considered this, something contemplative settling over his expression as he glanced toward where Elena stood nearby, helping distribute supplies among the gathered warriors alongside Clara and several other Omegas who had once occupied the lowest rungs of pack hierarchy but now found themselves essential to the coming defense. Word had reached Damien through a network of contacts he had quietly re-established over the preceding days that several of his former loyalists, wolves who had remained faithful even after his exile, were mobilizing to join the coming conflict. A warrior named Callum, once Damien's most trusted general, had been located in a neighboring territory and was reportedly gathering a small but formidable force of loyal fighters willing to march south in support of their true king's reclamation. "If Callum arrives in time," Damien explained to Cassius during a strategy session, "we'll have additional numbers capable of matching Edmund's forces more evenly. Without him, Blackthorn alone may struggle against the full weight of what's coming. How confident are you in his arrival?" "Callum has never failed me," Damien said simply. "If word has reached him, he will come." As the days progressed, tension within Blackthorn grew thicker, the entire pack aware that conflict loomed ever closer without knowing exactly when it would finally arrive. Elena found herself balancing constant worry for her mother's safety alongside the mounting dread of what battle might mean for Damien, whose calm exterior could not fully mask the weight he carried, knowing so many lives now depended on the outcome of a conflict that had begun as his alone. One quiet evening, as preparations continued around them, Elena found a rare moment alone, with Damien near the edge of the training grounds, the setting sun casting a warm glow across the tired but determined faces of warriors finishing their final drills for the day. "Whatever happens," Elena said softly, "I need you to know that I don't regret any of this. Not the bargain, not the lie that became true, not the danger that followed you here. If given the choice again, I would choose exactly this path." Damien turned to face her fully, something deeply moved passing across his features. "Even knowing it might cost you everything?" "Especially knowing that," Elena said, "because the alternative, living safely under Garrett's cruel claim, was never truly living at all. Whatever comes next, I would rather face it as myself, beside someone who sees me completely, than survive as someone else's possession." Damien reached for her hand, holding it gently, the warmth of the true bond between them settling comfortably now rather than surprising either of them as it once had. "Then whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horns, a signal Blackthorn scouts had established to announce significant developments along the border. Both of them turned sharply toward the sound, hearts pounding with uncertainty over whether this signaled the arrival of allies or enemies. Moments later, a scout came racing toward the gathering grounds, breathless but wearing an expression of relief rather than alarm. "Riders approaching from the east," he announced, flying colors matching descriptions given by Lord Damien. "They're identifying themselves as loyal to the true king." Relief flooded through Damien's expression as he exchanged a hopeful glance with Elena. "Callum," he said, "he's arrived." Together, they hurried toward the eastern border alongside Cassius and a contingent of Blackthorn warriors, arriving just as a substantial force of disciplined fighters emerged from the tree line, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of serious military training. At their head rode a broad, weathered warrior whose face broke into a relieved smile the moment his eyes landed on Damien. "Your Majesty," Callum said, dismounting quickly and bowing his head with genuine reverence. "When word reached me that you'd survived, I gathered every loyal fighter I could find within a week's ride. We came as quickly as possible." "You have my gratitude, old friend," Damien said, clasping Callum's arm firmly. "More than words can properly convey." Callum's gaze shifted toward Elena, curiosity and quiet respect passing across his features. "And this must be the mate the rumors spoke of." "Elena," Damien introduced, warmth clear in his voice despite the surrounding tension. "Without her courage, I doubt I would have survived long enough for any of this reinforcement to matter." Callum bowed respectfully toward her as well before turning back to address the larger strategic concerns pressing upon them all. "Edmund's main force is still several days out," he reported, "but make no mistake, it is substantial. He's mobilized nearly everything the council could muster, determined to end this before support for your survival spreads any further." Cassius stepped forward, extending a formal welcome despite the urgency of the moment. "Blackthorn stands ready to fight alongside you," he said. "Whatever this battle costs us, we do not abandon those who have earned our loyalty." As the combined forces began coordinating their defenses more thoroughly, incorporating Callum's disciplined fighters alongside Blackthorn's determined warriors, Elena felt a cautious flicker of hope beginning to grow amid the mounting tension. The battle ahead remained daunting, the outcome far from certain, but for the first time since Silas's chilling visit, she allowed herself to believe that survival, and perhaps even victory, remained genuinely within reach. Night fell over Blackthorn territory with the quiet, charged stillness that always preceded significant change. Warriors from two different origins working together under torchlight to finalize defenses that would soon be tested against the full weight of Edmund Thorne's stolen power. Edmund's forces arrived at dawn 3 days later, emerging from the northern tree line in numbers that made even Blackthorn's most seasoned warriors go quiet with sober assessment. Rows of disciplined fighters stretched across the horizon, organized banners marking divisions loyal to the council that had stolen Damien's throne. The sheer scale of the force a clear demonstration of exactly how much power Edmund commanded after months of consolidating his illegitimate rule. Elena stood near the rear defensive line alongside Clara and several other non-combat pack members, watching as Damien, Cassius, and Callum finalized their positions at the front, coordinating the combined forces of Blackthorn and Damien's loyal fighters into a formation designed to withstand the coming assault. Her heart pounded with a fear she fought hard to control, knowing that panic would help no one in the hours ahead. Edmund himself rode forward from his assembled forces, flanked by Silas and several other high-ranking enforcers, stopping a careful distance from the defensive line where Damien stood waiting. "Damien Ashgrave," Edmund called out, his voice carrying easily across the tense space between the two forces. "I confess, I underestimated your persistence. Most exiled kings simply disappear quietly, grateful merely to survive. Yet here you stand, having rallied an entire pack to your cause. You underestimated more than my persistence, Damien replied evenly. You underestimated the loyalty you sacrificed the moment you chose betrayal over honor. Edmund's expression tightened slightly at the accusation, though he recovered quickly, his composure settling back into practiced arrogance. Honor is a luxury for those secure enough in their position to afford it. I did what was necessary to protect the northern territories from a king too idealistic to understand the realities of true leadership. You did what was necessary to satisfy your own ambition, Damien countered. Nothing more. The exchange grew tenser, both men clearly aware that words alone would not resolve what had been building for months, that the true reckoning would come through conflict rather than conversation. Edmund's gaze swept briefly across the assembled Blackthorn warriors and Callum's loyal fighters, calculating the numbers arrayed against his own considerably larger force. Last chance, Edmund said finally. Surrender now, and I'll show mercy to this pack that sheltered you. Continue resisting, and everyone standing behind you shares in whatever consequences follow. Blackthorn does not surrender those it protects, Cassius interjected firmly, stepping forward alongside Damien. Whatever consequences you intend, we face them united rather than divided. Edmund studied the Alpha for a long moment, clearly recalculating whatever assumptions he had carried into this confrontation, before finally turning his horse back toward his own forces. Then let this be settled as it should have been settled months ago, he said, his voice carrying cold finality. He rode back toward his assembled fighters, and moments later, the horns of war sounded across the battlefield, both sides surging forward into the kind of intense, chaotic conflict that Elena had only ever heard described in cautionary tales meant to frighten young pups into respecting the dangers beyond pack borders. From her position near the rear, Elena watched with terrified fascination as the two forces clashed, warriors moving with practiced skill amid the chaos, Damien himself fighting with a controlled intensity that reminded her powerfully of the training grounds display against Garrett, except magnified now into something far more consequential. Callum fought alongside him, their coordination clearly the product of years spent as trusted companions in arms, while Cassius led Blackthorn's warriors with the steady authority that had earned him his position as alpha. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though Elena later realized it had likely been far shorter in actual time, adrenaline and fear distorting her sense of its true length. She watched anxiously from the sidelines, occasionally helping tend to injured warriors brought back from the front lines by exhausted comrades, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her entire body. At the height of the conflict, she spotted Damien facing off directly against Silas, the enforcer's earlier arrogance replaced now by genuine effort as he struggled to match Damien's superior skill. Elena watched with breathless tension as the exchange grew increasingly intense, Damien's movements precise and controlled even as fatigue clearly began settling into his limbs after prolonged combat. Finally, in a decisive exchange that seemed to unfold in slow motion, Damien gained the advantage, disarming Silas with a maneuver that left the enforcer kneeling, defeated, and clearly aware that his position had become untenable. Rather than pressing the advantage further, Damien stepped back, his voice carrying clearly across the nearby chaos. "Yield," he commanded. "This ends now, one way or another." Silas, breathing heavily and stripped of his earlier confidence, glanced toward where Edmund remained positioned at the edge of the battlefield, clearly hoping for guidance or rescue that did not come. Recognizing the abandonment for what it was, Silas finally lowered his head in defeat. "I yield," he said quietly. Word of Silas's defeat spread quickly among the remaining fighters, momentum shifting visibly as Edmund's forces, already struggling against the combined strength of Blackthorn and Callum's loyal fighters, began losing cohesion without their most feared enforcer leading the charge. Edmund, watching from his position at the battlefield's edge, realized with growing alarm that the tide had turned decisively against him. As his forces began retreating in increasing disarray, Edmund made one final desperate decision, turning his own horse and charging directly toward the defensive line where he had spotted Elena tending to injured warriors, clearly intending to use her as leverage in this rapidly deteriorating situation. Elena's heart lurched with terror as she spotted him approaching, but before Edmund could close the distance, Damien intercepted him directly, placing himself firmly between Edmund and Elena with unmistakable, protective resolve. "This ends with me," Damien said, his voice carrying absolute finality. "Not with anyone else who never asked to be part of this conflict," Edmund, recognizing the hopelessness of his position with his forces in full retreat and his most trusted enforcer already defeated, finally reined in his horse, exhaustion and defeat settling visibly across his features. "This isn't over," Edmund said, though the conviction behind his words had clearly weakened considerably. "It is," Damien said. "Your council's claim to power ends here, today, in front of witnesses who will carry word of this defeat back to every territory that once feared your rule." Around them, the battlefield gradually quieted as Edmund's remaining forces, recognizing the futility of continuing without their leader's full confidence, began surrendering or retreating entirely. Cassius and Callum moved quickly to secure the surrendering fighters, while Damien remained focused entirely on Edmund, the man who had stolen his throne and hunted him across countless territories, finally standing defeated before him. Elena watched with overwhelming relief as the battle's chaos slowly settled into the quieter, more orderly process of securing victory, Damien's earlier fierce intensity gradually easing back into the calm, controlled presence she had come to know so well over the preceding weeks. Whatever came next, whatever formal reckoning awaited Edmund for his betrayal, the immediate danger threatening Blackthorn and everyone within it had finally, decisively passed. As the last remnants of resistance faded across the battlefield, Damien turned back toward Elena, exhaustion evident in his posture but relief, and something deeper, more profound, shining clearly in his eyes as their gazes met across the settling chaos. The battle was won, but the true reckoning, the full restoration of everything Damien had lost, was only just beginning. In the days following the battle, Blackthorn territory settled into a strange, uneasy calm as the full consequences of what had transpired began to unfold. Edmund Thorne, stripped of his remaining forces and abandoned by allies who had quickly recognized the shifting tide of loyalty, was taken into custody by Callum's loyal fighters, destined to face formal judgment before the assembled representatives of the northern territories he had once ruled through fear and manipulation. Word of Damien's survival and decisive victory spread rapidly beyond Blackthorn's borders, carried by traders, travelers, and the returning loyalists who had fought alongside him. Within days, additional wolves who had once served faithfully under Damien's original rule began arriving at Blackthorn, drawn by news that their true king had not only survived but had proven himself capable of reclaiming what rightfully belonged to him. Elena watched the transformation of the territory with quiet amazement, the once suspicious pack that had mocked her lowly status now regarding both her and Damien with genuine respect and something approaching reverence. Even Garrett, humbled considerably by the events of recent weeks, had grown noticeably more subdued, his earlier arrogance replaced by a wary caution that suggested he finally understood the true scale of what he had nearly provoked through his jealous scheming. "You've done something remarkable here," Cassius remarked one evening, as he and Damien reviewed the growing list of loyalists arriving to pledge their support for the throne's restoration. Few kings could survive exile and betrayal, let alone rebuild sufficient strength to reclaim their position entirely. "I couldn't have done it alone," Damien said, glancing toward where Elena stood nearby, helping coordinate supplies for the growing number of allies gathering within Blackthorn's borders. "Whatever strength I found came largely from a bond I never expected to discover in a pack I stumbled into, purely by circumstance." As preparations began for the eventual journey north, where Damien intended to formally reclaim his throne before the assembled Council of Northern Territories, Elena found herself grappling with the reality of what her future now held. The quiet, humble life she had known within Blackthorn, however difficult, had at least been familiar. What awaited her now, as the mate of a king preparing to reclaim an entire kingdom, remained largely unknown territory. "Are you having second thoughts?" Damien asked one evening, noticing her contemplative silence as they sat together near the fire in what had once been her modest cabin. "Not about you," Elena said honestly, "never about you. But becoming queen, standing beside you in a role I never imagined for myself, that's a considerable adjustment to consider. You've already shown more courage and wisdom than most who are born into such positions," Damien said gently. "The Northern Territories will be fortunate to have someone who understands what it truly means to be dismissed, undervalued, and underestimated, only to prove herself capable of far more than anyone expected." Elena managed a small smile, though uncertainty still lingered beneath the surface. "What happens to my mother? She's not strong enough for a lengthy journey north, not yet. She'll travel when she's ready, under careful protection," Damien assured her. "Nothing about this transition needs to happen faster than what's safe for those we care about." Their conversation was interrupted by Clara's arrival, breathless with excitement as she hurried into the cabin. "Callum's scouts just returned," she announced. "The Northern Council has agreed to formally recognize your claim, provided you appear before them within the next fortnight to complete the restoration ceremony. Damien's expression grew serious at this news, understanding the significance of what lay ahead. Then it's time, he said quietly. Time to finally reclaim what was stolen, and set things right for the territories that suffered under Edmund's illegitimate rule. Over the following days, Blackthorn buzzed with preparation for the upcoming journey north, warriors and loyalists alike readying themselves for the formal restoration that would mark the true end of Edmund's usurped power. Elena spent her remaining time in the pack she had called home for her entire life, saying careful goodbyes to those who had shown her kindness through the years, promising Clara that their friendship would continue, regardless of the distance now separating their futures. The morning of departure arrived clear and bright, an entire procession of loyal fighters, Blackthorn warriors, and northern allies assembling to escort Damien and Elena toward the territories he had once ruled before betrayal drove him into hiding. Miriam, Elena's mother, watched from a comfortable carriage, arranged specifically for her continued recovery, her expression a mixture of pride and quiet amazement at how dramatically her daughter's circumstances had transformed. As the procession finally set out from Blackthorn's borders, Elena glanced back one final time at the territory that had shaped her entire life until this moment, the place where a desperate bargain born from cruelty and fear had somehow blossomed into something far more profound than either she or Damien could have anticipated that first tense night beside the bonfire. Whatever awaited them in the northern territories, whatever challenges came with reclaiming a stolen throne and rebuilding trust among a kingdom's worth of wary citizens, Elena faced the journey ahead with a steady resolve born from everything she had already survived and overcome. The road north stretched long before them, but for the first time and longer than she could remember, Elena walked it without fear clouding every step, certain instead that whatever waited at journey's end, she would face it exactly as she had faced everything else recently, standing firmly beside the man fate had chosen as her true mate. The journey north took nearly 2 weeks, the growing procession moving steadily through territories that gradually shifted in character the further they traveled from Blackthorn's familiar southern lands. Elena watched the landscape change around her, forests growing denser and more ancient, mountains rising sharper against the horizon, everything gradually taking on an air of formality and history that reminded her constantly of exactly how significant Damien's original position had truly been. Along the way, additional loyalists continued joining their growing company, wolves who had quietly maintained their allegiance to Damien's bloodline despite years of enforced silence under Edmund's rule. Each new arrival brought fresh stories of hardship endured during the false king's reign, tales of unfair taxation, suppressed dissent, and a general atmosphere of fear that had settled over the northern territories since Damien's original exile. "The people have suffered," Callum explained one evening, as their traveling company made camp within sight of the northern capital's distant towers. "Edmund ruled through intimidation rather than genuine loyalty. Restoring proper leadership will take time, patience, and considerable effort to rebuild the trust that was broken." "I understand that fully," Damien said, his gaze fixed thoughtfully on the distant capital where his fate, and the fate of an entire kingdom, would soon be formally decided. "Reclaiming the throne is only the beginning. The true work starts once the ceremony concludes." Elena listened to these conversations with growing understanding of the responsibility awaiting her, the role of queen carrying far more weight than simple ceremonial significance. She spent her evenings studying northern customs alongside Callum's wife, a kind, patient woman named Beatrice who had graciously offered to help prepare Elena for the formal expectations awaiting her within royal court life. "You needn't worry about mastering everything before we arrive," Beatrice reassured her during one such evening lesson. "The northern court values genuine character far more than perfect etiquette. Your story, the courage you've already shown, will speak louder than any formal training ever could." As they drew closer to the capital, tension within the traveling company grew palpable, everyone acutely aware that the formal restoration ceremony awaiting them carried significant weight not just for Damien's personal reclamation, but for the future stability of the entire northern kingdom. The remaining council members who had not directly supported Edmund's betrayal awaited their arrival with cautious anticipation, eager to see genuine proof that their true king had indeed survived and remained capable of leading effectively. They arrived at the capital's outer gates on a crisp, clear morning, the towering stone walls and ancient architecture leaving Elena momentarily breathless, despite everything she had already witnessed over recent weeks. Crowds gathered along the streets as word spread of their arrival, citizens who had lived under Edmund's uncertain rule watching with a mixture of hope and lingering caution as their exiled king finally returned to reclaim what had been stolen from him. The formal ceremony took place within the ancient council hall. a structure far grander than anything Elena had ever encountered within Blackthorn's modest territory. Remaining council members, elders, and representatives from across the northern territories gathered to witness the restoration, their expressions ranging from genuine relief to careful, measured hope. Damien stood before the assembled council, Elena beside him, as the formal proceedings began, ancient rituals and declarations marking the official end of Edmund's illegitimate rule and the restoration of the rightful bloodline. Elena listened with quiet reverence as elders recited traditions passed down through generations, the weight of history settling over the proceedings with a gravity she hadn't fully anticipated. When the formal declarations concluded, an elder council member stepped forward, addressing the gathered assembly with solemn authority. Let it be known throughout every territory of this kingdom that Damien Ashgrave is restored as rightful king, his claim confirmed not only through bloodline, but through the true mate bond recognized by ancient law as further proof of destiny's favor. The assembly erupted into respectful applause, and Elena felt Damien's hand find hers, squeezing gently as the weight of the moment settled fully over both of them. Whatever uncertainty had accompanied their journey north, whatever fear had lingered about facing a role neither of them had originally anticipated, the formal restoration marked a definitive turning point neither could ignore. Introducing, the elder continued, his voice carrying clearly across the hall, Elena Ashgrave, true mate and queen of the Northern Territories. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as the assembly's applause grew louder, genuine warmth replacing the earlier caution in many expressions throughout the hall. Whatever journey had brought her to this moment, from a desperate bargain struck beside a bonfire, to standing here now as queen of an entire kingdom, she felt overwhelming gratitude for every difficult step that had led her here. Following the formal ceremony, a celebration unfolded throughout the capital, citizens gathering in the streets to welcome their restored king and his queen, with genuine joy that had been suppressed for far too long under Edmund's uncertain rule. Elena moved through the celebrations beside Damien, meeting citizens whose lives had been directly impacted by the recent conflict, listening to their stories with genuine care and growing understanding of the responsibility now resting upon her shoulders. Later that evening, as the celebrations gradually quieted and the newly restored king and queen finally found a moment of peace within the palace that would now serve as their home, Elena stood beside Damien on a balcony overlooking the capital, city lights spreading beneath them like scattered stars. "Any regrets?" Damien asked quietly, echoing the question she had once posed to him during their earliest days together. "None," Elena said, leaning gently against him. "Every difficult moment led exactly here, to exactly this life I never imagined for myself, but wouldn't trade for anything now." Damien wrapped his arm around her, drawing her closer as they watched the city settle into peaceful evening rest below them. "The pact that once believed you belonged to someone unworthy of you," he said softly, "now stands as proof that fate has far grander plans than any of us could have anticipated." Elena smiled, resting her head against his shoulder, as the weight of everything they had overcome together finally settled into quiet, well-earned peace. Whatever challenges awaited them as they began the genuine work of rebuilding trust and stability throughout the Northern Territories, she faced the future with the same steady resolve that had carried her through every difficult moment since the night a stranger first stepped out of the shadows to offer protection she never expected to need so completely. Blackthorn's whispers, once filled with cruel judgment about a lowly Omega's worth, had given way entirely to a truth far more powerful than any rumor. Elena had never been beneath anyone's claim. She had always been meant for exactly this, a queen standing beside her true king, bound not by circumstance or bargain, but by a destiny that had recognized their worth long before either of them fully understood it themselves.